Hello, I wanted to make this little video to show you Chapter 1, just to go over the stuff that I think is important, to point out a few things to you. I have here the intro map, and you can find the intro map at faculty.ivc.edu/mmcneil. And if you look under Lessons, Lesson 1, you'll see this map that I'm showing you here. Basically, Chapter 1 is introductory, and so it talks about economics, the relevance of it, a little bit of insight into the history of human beings. The history of human beings has been relatively short and poor and quite dismal. By comparison, today's life, the one that we live in Orange County, is astounding and remarkable. And I've asked classes for years now, if you have the choice to be blue-collar bellflower, that is to live a blue-collar life in a working-class neighborhood in Bellflower or someplace like that, would you choose that or to live the life of royalty in the year 1500? And it turns out that most people would choose blue-collar bellflower because they live longer, they live cleaner, they have more health, more access to entertainment, better medicines, anesthetics, on and on, cars. And it's remarkable that a country of 300 million people live, on average, I realize it's an average, better than royalty did in the year 1500. There's some economic miracle here that we need to appreciate. And economics is about creating wealth for ourselves and others. And wealth we define as things of value. It's not necessarily material things. It's whatever you value. If you have what you value, you're wealthy, even if it's not big cars and big bank accounts and jewels and that sort of thing. I mean, bling. Anyway, this chapter then has an appendix that goes into this in more detail, but it's also in the chapter that talks about relationships and the role of theory. Theory is what tells you that you know there's a relationship between two variables. It explains how one thing is connected to another. And it helps eliminate the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. This is the fallacy of association is causation. That's what this book calls it. That is, because something is correlated or associated with something, it necessarily causes it. That's simply not true. Now, there are two other fallacies. The fallacy of composition that says what's good for the individual is necessarily good for everyone else. Or, technically, it's what's good for the one is good for the many. Or, conversely, whatever is good for the many is necessarily good for the one. There are all sorts of fallacy of composition problems, like the classic one. If everyone is sitting at Angel Stadium and you stand up to get a better view of the game, you conclude that everybody should stand up so that everybody will get a better view. This is not possibly true. The third is ignoring secondary effects. In economics, we have secondary effects a lot of the time. That we try to do one thing, but in the process we create all sorts of other things that we didn't plan on. And later you'll see that rational decision-making requires that we compare the marginal benefits of an action to the marginal costs. But when we look at secondary effects, it may well be that if you plan to do something and it appears that the marginal benefits exceed the marginal costs, if you're looking at the costs of just the immediate costs, there might be other costs down the road that are added on to this that make it not such a good idea in the end. There's one of the current examples is that when we bail out banks, we save banks and the deposits in banks and stabilize the economy and so forth. But it comes at a cost, and many economists believe that it makes banks behave in riskier manners, in a riskier manner, because they believe that the government will simply bail them out. Anyway, relationships are positive or negative. That is, if both variables go up, it's positive. That is, if they go in the same directions, both up or both down. Whereas if one goes up, and when one goes up, the other goes down. One goes down, the other goes up, then that's a negative relationship. Ceteris paribus means that when we look at relationships, we hold everything else constant. That could be play a role in this relationship. So when we look at just two variables like the price of housing in Orange County and the quantity sold, we assume that interest rates, expectations about the future, price of houses, incomes, on and on, population, all of these things are held constant when we look at this relationship between price and quantity. Now, when we talk about relationships between two things, we hold things constant. So if you have a relationship y equals 3x plus 2, well, the two variables are x and y. X is the independent variable, y is the dependent variable. And 3, that is 3x plus 2, 3 is the slope term, and 2 is the y-intercept. Both 3 and 2 are constants. So now the question is, what happens when you change the value of the independent variable? That is, what is the value of the function if the value of x is 2, for instance? Well, 3 times 2 is 4 plus the 2, 3x plus 2. So if the value of x is 2, then 6 plus 2 is 8. What happens if you change the value of the independent variable, which is x, from 2 to 3? Well, what happens is you simply cause the value of y to change. And if you look at a graph, that's just a movement on the existing graph of that relationship from x, whatever the y value is, where x is equal to 2, to whatever the y value is when x is equal to 3. So you don't shift, it just moves it up and down the line to different points on the existing line. What then happens when you change one of the constants? So if you change this from 3x equals 2, y equals 3x plus 2 to y equals 3x plus 3, well, in that case you would get a shift. So the lesson here is that if you change one of the constants, it will cause a shift. This is very important for later on when we look at relationships, and we need to know the difference between what causes a shift and what causes a movement. The book goes into the scientific method. That's very interesting, I suppose, but the book does a good job of it. Now, the background noise to all human existence is scarcity, and that comes up. That's the first thing in every introductory econ class. And it's basically the unlimited wants and scarce resources problem. The resources are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. The payment to land is rent, the payment to labor is wages, the payment to capital is interest, and the payment to entrepreneurship is profit. Now, each of these has definitions. You can get the examples out of the book and so forth. But what's interesting, what's relevant in this case here, when we're talking about scarcity, is that these resources are limited at any given time, whereas wants are not. So whenever we have a situation where something more is wanted of it than is freely available, that is, can be had freely, then it's scarce. If it uses scarce resources to produce, it's scarce. And if something is scarce, we have to decide who, out of all the people who want it, are going to get it, because not everybody who wants it can have it. So I am, at this point, desperate for a Mercedes SLS. Those are very scarce because so many people want them and so few are available. So rationing is the question of how we decide what method to use to decide who gets them and who doesn't. And for most things, I suppose, certainly for Mercedes SLSs, they are rationed using money. Whoever bids the highest gets them. We ration other ways. A's in an econ class are sadly not rationed based on how much you pay me, but rationed based on your performance on tests. Seats at Harvard are rationed based on money and performance on tests, and perhaps some sort of favoritism. If your grandfather bought the library for Harvard, there's a good chance you'll get in. Anyway, how do we reduce something that is scarce? How do we make it less scarce? Well, there are two ways. You can make more of it available, or you can make it less wanted. You make more of it available by producing more. You make it less wanted by producing substitutes for it. But the way you don't reduce scarcity is by passing a law to decrease the price of it. That doesn't reduce the scarcity. It makes things crazy and worse. The chapter then goes into the issue of the circular flow diagram. This is the basic picture of the relationships in the economy, and it's the 2 by 2 by 2 circular flow. There are two sectors, households and firms. Households are consuming units. If there's any question about this, just come to my house and watch my family. Heaven knows they consume. So households are consuming units, firms are producing units, and the two market types are the factor or resource markets, and the other is the product markets. And so if we look at there's one flow, the real flow, going in one direction, and then there's the money flow in the opposite direction. I have a picture of this. There it is. There's the product markets, there are the resource markets, and the red line is the real flow. This is households. Households sell the resources, primarily labor resources, but whatever other resources they own, they sell them in the resource markets, and the firms take these resources and use them to produce goods and services. And then the goods and services are sent up to the product markets, where households buy them, bring them back to the households, and consume them. Now, there's a green flow flowing the opposite direction. That's the money flow. When firms buy resources, they send money to the households in the form of household income. And households then take the money to the product markets and buy the goods and services they want so that they can consume them. This money flows back to the firms so that they can buy more resources, etc. Now, the chapter goes into other concepts like the difference between a good and a service. A service is an intangible, a transaction for which an intangible something is sold, whereas a good is tangible, physical. Micro versus macro. Micro looks at the small individual elements in the economy, and macro looks at the overall big picture. Positive statements versus normative statements. Positive statements are attempts to describe what is in value neutral terms. There's a test about a positive statement. It can be proven or disproven. That's it. If the statement can be proven or disproven, it's positive. A normative statement is one that is based on individual preferences, likes, dislikes. So any statement that has in it, it's fair, it's not fair, it's good, bad, right, wrong, better, worse. These are all statements based on individual values and preferences, something that each individual likes and then expresses their preference. These are normative statements. In economics, and certainly in a political year, you need to know the distinction between positive statements and normative statements. Nominal values and real values. Nominal values is just the price of something expressed in the current price in the current dollars, whereas real is adjusted for inflation. I don't think I'm going to emphasize this very much. Then the book goes into marginal analysis. It's the great contribution that economists have made to decision-making sciences, I think, in the last 100 years or so. And so how do you make a decision? You compare the marginal. Marginal means additional costs of doing something versus the additional or marginal benefits of doing something. So that when you decide how many classes to take in a semester, there are benefits to taking more classes, but there are additional costs of taking more classes as well. And it turns out that the costs of taking additional classes go up. So that at some point you say, if I take the first class, I can do it kind of easily. It's not going to cost me too much of the other parts of my life. But if you take a second class, you're going to have to cut out more and more valuable aspects of your life in order to do the second class. The third class, more again. The fourth, more again. The fifth, sixth, seventh. By the eighth class, you're giving up sleep. So always you have to decide, is the marginal benefit that I'm going to get from this additional or marginal class more? Does it outweigh the marginal costs or the added costs of taking this class? And as long as the added benefits exceed the added costs or marginal costs, then it's best to do it. And if not, you shouldn't. I've already done the fallacies to straight thinking. Those are the three. Anyway, those are the core issues to this chapter. And finally, I'll leave you with this little picture here. What's remarkable about this picture is this, that, this, that, maybe that, and all of these. This picture was taken about 1900. These are railroad workers in the United States. Well, can you see? Huh? How much work has changed. It was that dangerous, that rough. At the time these people were working, the typical working day was 5 12-hour days and half day on Saturday. Anyway, that should just about do it. I wish you well in this studying Chapter 1.